Hello, I am here to talk about global warming. Global warming is real. Is the Earth flat? No, that's preposterous. There's an immense amount of scientific data showing the contrary. But facts don't lie, but politicians and companies do. And today, one of the most pressing and urgent issues facing our planet is refuted by almost half of our nation despite a consensus amongst the scientific community to the contrary. Every major institution in the world that studies climate science agrees that climate change is real. The greatest threat to our planet is considered fantasy by a large portion of our population because of political views. To show that climate change is indeed real, I will first examine greenhouse gas theory, then highlight the wide array of statistics corroborating it, refute the claims of the deniers, and finally describe what will happen if we don't act soon. To begin with, we will go back to 1896 and the ominous hints of what was to come. In 1896, Svante Arrhenius published in Philosophical Magazine a study on the influence of carbonic acid in the air upon the temperature of the ground. In it, he studied the relationship between carbonic acid, otherwise known as CO2, and its relation to global temperatures, or temperatures in the Arctic polar regions. In it, he states that if the quantity of carbonic acid increases in geometric progression, the augmentation of the temperature will increase nearly in arithmetic progression. He sums it up by saying a simple calculation shows that the temperature in the Arctic regions would rise about 8 to 9 degrees Celsius if the carbonic acid is increased to 2.5 to 3 times its present value. Per NASA's data on CO2 levels, it was 294.9 parts per million in 1896 when Arrhenius published his work, and increased to 391.15 as of 2011. Accordingly, the Arctic polar temperature has increased 2.9 degrees Celsius since the beginning of the 20th century, which is when temperature began to be recorded at the pole. Now, I present some of the best evidence for climate change. One of the best sources for global average temperature is NASA's GISS surface temperature analysis. It expanded previous temperature recording stations around the world to better find the global mean. Because the weather stations used by GISS are so spread over the globe, they're able to adjust for any local influences and variance to find the better average. The data that they have collected corroborates Arrhenius' predictions from 1896. One of the more easily observed and comprehensible pieces of evidence for global warming is the melting of glaciers. According to the National Snow and Data Ice Center, the NSIDC, from 1961 to 2005, the thickness of small glaciers decreased approximately 12 meters, or the equivalent of more than 9,000 cubic kilometers of water. The NSIDC also reports that starting in 1991, glaciers began to shrink at a rate only possible if anthropogenic climate change were real. They found that from 1850 to 1990, only 25 plus or minus 35% of the glacier mass loss could be attributed to anthropogenic causes. But from 1991 to 2010, the glacier mass loss attributed to anthropogenic causes increased to 69 plus or minus 24%. These also prevent. Another interesting piece of evidence for climate change is the increase in range of mangrove trees in Florida. Historically, mangroves have been confined to just north of St. Augustine, but they have been slowly creeping north in recent years. According to Smithsonian Magazine, we found a strong relationship between increase in mangrove areas and decrease in frequency of extreme cold events. Now that you see the various and diverse evidence for climate change, I will tell you what will happen if we don't do everything in our power to fix it. NASA's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change consists of over 1,300 scientists, predicts a net negative effect due to climate change. This has led to an increase in more intense droughts, more frequent Category 4 and 5 hurricanes, and more frequent wildfires in western and southwestern U.S. Some low-lying nations may simply cease to exist as sea levels rise between 4 and 10 feet over the course of the century. These are only the tip of the iceberg, and if we continue to consume fossil fuels at current levels, then these will become even more exacerbated and dangerous. Although the consequences for inaction regarding climate change are disastrous, as more people learn the statistics about it, they will have to accept the fact that it is real. Hopefully, if you don't believe in climate change, the evidence I have presented is enough to convince you otherwise. To quote Bill Nye the Science Guy, climate change is happening, humans are causing it, and I think it is perhaps the most serious environmental issue facing us. Thank you for coming today.